So once again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hand you over to the panelists. So let's give them a big round of applause once again. Terima kasih.
Thank you. This is very early. So that's very good. We'll get this done very quickly. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for staying back for this. As the MC announced, this is a cross-border conversation. So we've got panelists from Malaysia and Philippines, and Surin, who's going to represent whole of Asia, ASEAN. So let me begin. The other point is we want to talk about ESG, but not ESG in a vacuum, but ESG in a sense of cross-border trade. That's a big area for you, Sheikh Bakar, right? So, anyway, in 2023, intra-ASEAN trade reached $1 trillion. It's about a quarter of the entire region's trade. So that means all the countries in ASEAN trading amongst themselves is about $1 trillion. And it's make up about 1/4 of total trade of the entire region with the entire world. So it's a big, big number. So I'm going to start off this conversation around this aspect. We'll start off with Mr. Surin. Why? We had a preparation before this. He does work across the whole of Southeast Asia. So I thought perhaps it's good to start with him to look across Southeast Asia. Mr. Surin is from ProForest. So perhaps, Mr. Surin, if you don't mind, a short introduction of yourself and your organization. And the question I have is the overview of the commodity agriculture supply chain. So we're going to focus on supply chain and trade in this particular panel, especially around palm oil, rubber, coconut, sugar across ASEAN, the sustainability landscape and how it has changed over the years. Mr. Surin.
Thank you, Mr. Chow. So I'm Surin Suksuan. I'm the Southeast Asia Regional Technical Advisor. And ProForest is a mission-driven independent organization. It focuses on supporting businesses in ensuring that their production and sourcing of agricultural commodities is done in a responsible and sustainable manner. And in Southeast Asia, we are focusing on the key commodities in this region, namely palm oil, sugar, rubber, coconut, and a few other minor commodities as well. Globally, we work on other commodities, including cattle, soy, and so on. But we'll focus mainly on Southeast Asia for today. Now, just to give you an overview, because it's a very complex issue talking about commodity supply chains, I guess you can say that the ESG agenda in this region can broadly be divided into 3 phases, if you like. In the early days, I would say, coming from global development agenda and so on, most of the countries in the region had already been putting in place regulatory framework, to support the sustainable development of each country. So, for example, countries putting in place requirements for EIAs and river buffer zone, conservation, all that. So all that has already been going on for some time. And later on, after the Rio conference, then we have the rise of certification schemes, especially within the commodity supply chain. So for the forestry sector, for example, you have the FSC, or the Forest Stewardship Council certification. For palm oil, you have the RSPO. For sugar, you have Bond Sucro, and so on. Right? So that has been in the voluntary space, and it was demand-driven, consumer-driven, and also downstream supply chain-driven. So it's, the big companies are saying we want to source sustainably. The producers then have to voluntarily comply so that they can get on board the supply chain of these big companies. But the third wave that we're seeing now is getting, I guess, more serious for everyone, because it's not voluntary anymore, and the regulators are coming into the picture, with ESG requirements, and it's moving in various sectors. I would say that in Southeast Asia, probably the finance sector is the key driver, Because when they are saying to companies that, hey, if you want to access our finance and you actually have to comply with our ESG requirements, then the companies are going to really pull up their socks and get down to business. So maybe I'll stop there for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Surin. You're describing to us the phases of change across ASEAN. First, just the framework, then certification, but now really main business. And it's good that finance play a key role, and I know a number of friends here from banks, and they play a key role to kind of drive that. Very good. We're going to change gear a bit, if you don't mind, to Philippines. Ms. Janica just flew in yesterday specifically for this. Well, thank you for this. Janica, maybe you could introduce yourself. And also, your area of work is biodiversity. So how do we integrate biodiversity into ESG framework, and what companies can do to address that? And I just heard just now, right? Sime Darby Property is the urban diversity partner for this particular consortium. So perhaps your view, first introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Janica Masigan, and my background, as I said, is conservation, biology, and ecology. I used to say that my stakeholders are mostly non-humans. But putting that aside, so the dream really is to be able to find a safe operating space for nature and people to thrive. And that's what we do in our organization. So I'm from Center for Conservation Innovations Philippines Incorporated, or CCIPH. And our goal at CCIPH is to identify solutions and innovations in order to achieve nature-positive impacts. Because we at CCIPH, we believe that restoration or the resilience of our ecosystems are crucial to our overall resilience as a community and as a species ourselves. So most of the work that we do involve managing natural resources and then providing technical and scientific backstop to inform policies, inform decision makings of different sectors at various scales, from local communities to local government units, national agencies, and even the corporate and private sector. It's a long introduction, isn't it? Okay, now going to the question about how biodiversity is integrated into ESG. Well, I mean, in recent years, corporations have increasingly recognized the importance of biodiversity and nature in corporate reporting and responsible investing. And the thing is, biodiversity, it's a huge part, it's a huge component of your natural capital. Yeah? So your natural capital, that's the stock, that's the supply in your supply chain. It includes the renewable and non-renewable resources, from plants to animals, soil, air, water. It also includes the services that you can generate from nature, like your carbon sequestration, your air filtration, pollination services. So all of that makes up your natural capital. And so when it comes to strategic sustainability planning, companies have to account for possible risk associated to biodiversity loss, as well as the equivalent possible economic impacts to businesses. And the thing is, with ESG frameworks, the existing ones, even when you're looking at the environmental factor, most of them are a bit human-centric, so to speak. It's a bit human-centric. So that would lead to an oversight on the intrinsic value of nature. So I suppose it's about time to put biodiversity at the center of corporate reporting.
Very good. I'm going to just put Sime Darby Property on notice. Since they're going to be the biodiversity partner, later I'm going to ask a question to the team from SIMW Property on that particular topic. But anyway, thank you. But I like your point. I don't know about you, some of us who are from this part of, we are very near Bukit Kiara, right? So some of us go for hiking and morning walk. So that is the, back to your point, it's the, your word, natural capital that we need to take care of. And that's the source of many things to come. Thank you. Sorry, so go ahead, Janika. All right, so now we're going to come back to Malaysia. There's a person sitting next to me who is very important, kind of work in an organization that helps trading between Malaysia and many countries, the Deputy CEO of Matrade. So, Encik Abu Bakar, maybe you can introduce yourself. And the question, if you don't mind, there's something that you are working on called Greening Export Supply Chain Initiative. Perhaps, what's that? First, introduce yourself, and what's that, and how important that is for us here.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chow, and esteemed panelists. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abu Bakar Yu. I'm the Deputy CEO and also the CDO of Matrade. Matrade is basically a national trade promotion organization of Malaysia under the purview of our Ministry of Investment, Trade and Industry, MITI. And we were established, I'm doing a bit promo of Matrade. We were established in 1993, more than 30 years ago. And our mandate is basically to facilitate and promote Malaysia enterprises to the global arena for both merchandise and services. And we have our headquarters here, not far from Bukit Kiara, not far from here, about 10 minutes from here. And we have 6 regional offices in Malaysia, as well as 49 global trade offices around the world. And just want to, because my perspective is basically on business and international trade, and later I will go to the Greening Export Supply Chain Initiative, because Matrade, we have embarked on our ESG and sustainability initiative aggressively, just before COVID in 2019. And we have launched our sustainable action values for exporters, because we are basically helping our enterprises to export and to establish their global footprints everywhere in the world. Malaysia, for your information, we are exporting to more than 200 international markets. So you can see that Malaysia actually is one of the global trading nations. And due to the importance of international trade and export, and due to the global megatrends that we know, everyone knows about the urgency with regard to ESG and sustainability, we have to do something about preparing our local enterprises to be able to comply with the international ESG regulatory requirements. And this is where we have embarked on Greening Export Supply Chain Initiative. It's basically to cater for also, for the needs for us to address the gaps in the ecosystem of sustainability and ESG. And we have launched our 5-year National Trade Blueprint in 2021. And part of our blueprint is basically on sustainability and ESG. In fact, to reflect our aggressiveness, we have established an ESG unit in Matrade to look into specifically how we can facilitate our enterprises to be able to immerse into global ESG requirements. And this initiative, Global Export Supply Chain Initiative, is an initiative that we work together with various stakeholders, be it public as well as the private sector, the industry players and stakeholders. And for your information, in Malaysia, we have 1.2 million registered businesses, and 97.4% they are micro, small and medium enterprises, and the rest are mid-tier and local large corporation. Of course, we have our multinational companies here. But our mandate is basically because our main stakeholders for international trade and export is basically the micro, small, and medium enterprises. So I think if you ask them about ESG or sustainability, their awareness level is still very, very low. And I think this is where we need to actually converge among the micro, small, and medium enterprises, the mid-tier companies, as well as the local large corporation to support each other. And this is part of this initiative framework. And we have another program called Mid-Tier Companies Development Program. And under this program, we have benchmarking initiative where the mid-tier companies supporting the micro, small, and medium enterprises. Because why? These mid-tier companies, they are exporters and they have a pool of domestic supply chain in Malaysia that comprises actually the micro, small, and medium enterprises. So for the exporter, the mid-tier companies to be able to comply with their global customers' requirement on ESG, they also need to educate and guide and coach their supply chain to be able to also embrace and adopt ESG requirements, based on the global customers' needs. Yeah.
Thank you. So that's your Greening Export Supply Chain Initiative. Very good. So the focus is across all Malaysian corporates, but your point about educating, awareness, and that perhaps where Asia ESG Positive Impact Consortium, the one that was launched today, will be helpful, Encik Abu Bakar. Yeah, very helpful. All right, so maybe we just want to go back to that particular point about biodiversity as the natural capital, Janica. What are the key risks? I think all of us here, and I understand the audience today are not just from Malaysia, but also Philippines and Indonesia. What's the key risk of not addressing the biodiversity adequately? And how do we make sure it's incorporated into the supply chain appropriately, Janica?
Well, most of biodiversity degradation occur in specific supply chain, right? That's the sad truth to it. Food production, beverage production, transportation, construction, even fashion and retail. So, and the reason for this is because the entirety of their economic values rely solely on natural resources. So when the nature loses its capacity to be able to provide these services like pollination services, for example, and even air filtration or water regulation services, then the whole sector faces disruption to it. So it is therefore important to be able to recognize its role in supply chain and to be able to identify how to manage and mitigate potential biodiversity loss, because it's going to go both ways. You will be affected, businesses will be affected by scarcity of resources, for example, and at the same time, your business can also have damaging impacts on biodiversity. So I suppose for companies, one thing that they can do is maybe consider expanding their materiality assessments to look at possible biodiversity risk related and opportunities, and then identify what are possible drivers, identify how to mitigate these drivers, follow the mitigation hierarchy. I'm sure, Mr. Serene, you're familiar as a fellow high conservation value practitioner. Identify what to avoid, what to minimize, if it can't be avoided or minimized, how to restore it, and then the last possible solution is maybe look at offsetting if it's possible. Yeah.
So expand the materiality limit computation, look at the possible drivers, look at mitigation, and I'm hoping maybe Mr. Surin can take it from there. And then you mentioned the last point about offsetting. before we go to Mr. Surin, Jenica, what do you mean by offsetting here?
Yeah, so offsetting is that when you find if the actions or operations of your business has possible negative impacts on biodiversity, and then you cannot avoid or minimize this impact. So what you're going to do is you have to offset it. So that could mean on-site offsetting or off-site offsetting. It could be maybe doing reforestation activities or restoration activities, finding an area. It's kind of like for like. So whatever you destroy, you offset.
Right. And I like your point, because your point about degradation of biodiversity happen naturally because of transportation and whatever activities that we do. So it's unavoidable. The question is, how do we mitigate it? Mr. Surin, perhaps you're just taking on Ms. Jenica's point. How do we mitigate? How do we make sure it doesn't damage further from your experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, as Jenica has mentioned, there's a hierarchy, right? So mitigation is to be done if you can't avoid and you can find other alternatives, and you still have to go ahead with the project. Then you need to look into mitigation. Of course, it's quite difficult to be able to mitigate effectively all the potential impacts of a particular development project, and especially if, say, deforestation is concerned. I mean, yeah, maybe you can reduce the area that you're going to deforest. Maybe you can reduce the impact on biodiversity or species. Maybe you can reduce the impact on water pollution and all that, right? But I think we have to accept that there will still be some damage. So yeah, I mean, for some industries, probably you can mitigate better, but for some other industries, the mining industry, for example, mitigation is going to be a huge task and also very expensive. So I think that's why we want people to really work through that hierarchy and make sure that they have reduced as much as possible potential impacts and mitigate when they have to. Yeah.
Do you mind, just for our audience perspective, perhaps explanation of the hierarchy, if you don't mind?
Well, I can't remember offhand with the hierarchy, and maybe Jenica has got better memory than me. But I think avoiding is the first, thing that you do, right? If you are going to have certain, I mean, take the example of the plantation sector, which I'm more familiar with, right? And one of the things that we do in the plantation sector is carrying out the high conservation value assessment. And this assessment will help plantations decide whether a particular area should be cleared or not. So, because when we look at a greenfield area, for example, right, there could be standing forest there. And forests, actually, they're not all equal, right? Some may be of higher value, some may already be quite degraded. So you need to be able to differentiate. Now, sometimes you may even have rare, threatened, or endangered species in a particular forest, in which case then the usual advice is don't clear that forest, okay? So yeah, I mean, these are some of the things that can be done in terms of avoiding that kind of, damage. But if you actually have to, develop a particular area, then can you reduce, that level of, the intensity of that development, right? And then you try to reduce as much as possible. Maybe you look at your what kind of crop selection, the intensity of planting. Could you do intercropping? There are various options there, and then if you still need to go ahead with certain things, then you can look at mitigation, right? And then finally offsetting. I mean, I might have missed out one or two steps there, so maybe Jenica can help out. So, yeah.
You explained that perfectly, Mr. Surin.
Very good. I think it's important for us also to take away from today's conversation, not just the theory of it, but how to do it. So your point about having high conservation valuation assessment is useful, so that then you can come up with a very detailed plan addressing the different evaluation assessments, right? And your point, some could be crop selection, some could be the intensity of plantation. Thank you. Perhaps then going back to Martrade, your greening supply chain, how does what is the critical success factors for you, as a deputy CEO? What must we do besides awareness? What do we need to do? And perhaps not just, I guess, SMEs in Malaysia, but across Philippines, Indonesia. What do we need to do to make sure we don't lose out in this cross-border trade landscape?
Yeah, I think the risk of not complying with ESG requirements is basically our market access is restricted, going to be restricted because the advanced markets like Europeans and America, they have introduced a series of ESG and sustainability laws and acts, such as the Supply Chain Act, all that. So if you are not able to comply with that requirements, then there will be impact on the market access by our enterprises. And last year, Malaysia exported 1.426 trillion ringgit Malaysia worth of goods. And our trade numbers just out yesterday. For the first 5 months this year, we exported now already surpassed 1.1 trillion ringgit Malaysia, our trade. Yeah, but for export, more than 600 billion ringgit Malaysia worth of export for goods only. So if we don't really serious about it, and especially for our small and medium enterprises, there will be a lot of challenges ahead of them because the contribution by micro, small and medium enterprises to our total export is still small. In 2022, our MSMEs, they only contributed about 10.5% of the total 1.525 trillion. Last year, 1.43 trillion. 2022, 1.525 trillion ringgit worth of export. Only 10.5 from micro, small and medium enterprises. Yeah, only 10%. Government has set a target next year to increase the share to 15%, and by 2030, government has increased to 30% of contribution. So if we want to ramp up this kind of export, we have to really look into the capability of our enterprises, especially the SMEs, to be able to not only embrace, not only aware of, but how to comply it. And this is where the role of our 49 overseas trade officers, first, of course, they need to furnish a lot of the information about all these requirements. But here back home, we need to have a complete synergy among the ecosystem players. Not only Matrade, we are talking about international trade and export, but there are a lot of other government agencies, ministries, as well as private sectors. They are very keen or very interested to pursue ESG agenda, but whether are we really in sync? So this is where under our 5-year national trade blueprint, we have that component on sustainability and ESG for us to work together with all the relevant stakeholders, for us to be able, first, to make sure our enterprises, again, is not only aware, but the action plan for us to go through the journey of compliance to ESG and sustainability requirements. So,
very good. So what you're saying, with our export is about 1.5 trillion, 10% is from SMEs, but we want to grow that to 30%. But critical for that is for SMEs to embrace ESG and the different sectors to work together. Are there any particular sector that we need to, in Malaysia or Indonesia or Philippines, from your point of view, that we need to, have a kick up the, to make them work harder? Which particular sector that we need help?
Well, we are talking about exporting. 85% of our export came from manufactured goods. The rest, commodities, agricultural, produce, all that. And I think Malaysia is chairing ASEAN next year. So there should be probably initiative for ASEAN countries to revisit the ESG framework that every country has and see whether there should be a uniformity of framework, ESG framework, for us to have more common kind of platform. I'm talking from business perspective for our enterprises. So I will have to look into that among the ASEAN countries, because in terms of trade and export, we already have our ASEAN free trade area, trade agreement AFTA for many years, since 1993. But how about now shifting to the new mega trends about ESG? So we have to be serious about it and be able to help enterprises from all the ASEAN countries. And in fact, last year, our ministry, MITI, they had launched the IESG framework for manufacturing. So we are supporting the initiative, but we need to align with other ASEAN countries as well.
Very good. I think that's the purpose of the session today, right? I mean, and this Asia ESG positive impact is about us working together, maybe starting with the first 3 countries. Jenica, your point of view from Philippines, the suggestion by Encik Abu Bakar to work cross-border more, especially for intra-trade, the intra-ASEAN trade, your views?
Yes, there's actually a lot of opportunities when it comes to working cross-border. And there are also opportunities when it comes to compliance to ESG framework, again, coming from the biodiversity perspective. There are ways to maybe look at identifying biodiversity-specific indicators and then aligning those with traditional ESG metrics. And even aligning that with international or global conservation goals, like the very recently signed Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. That's one of them. And then aside from looking at just compliance, I would like to challenge our partners, the private sectors, to looking beyond compliance, going beyond compliance and working on additionality, because compliance is good, it's great, but I think beyond compliance is way sexier, when it comes to like investors, especially investors that are very focused and investors that prioritizes a business that are businesses that have or are able to demonstrate nature positive commitments. So there are opportunities there, and there are definitely opportunities for collaboration and partnership between the 3 countries and other Asian nations.
Yeah, especially with the geopolitical tension heating up. Perhaps I can open now for questions from the floor, just to make sure that you all are paying attention anyway, just joking. Any questions from the floor around the particular topic around cross-border trade and ESG? Yes, sir. Thank you. We can get a mic to this gentleman here, please.
Try to keep this meeting warm.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
The question I have is this, because when you look at the supply chain, and when we are talking about in a very global environment, rules may change over time, right? Where and it's not, sometimes it's not for the wrong reason, right? Because you need to do this progressively, right? So my question is that given that individually we are small countries compared to the US and Europe, is there an ASEAN-based standardization when it comes to all these supply chain? Because, I mean, for me, is number one is, we need to know what it's all about. I guess this is where education comes in. But number 2 is, what's the solution? Because for a business, when you do not know what's the solution, that's a scary part, I believe. Thanks
That's right. And next year, Malaysia is the chair of... So maybe I'll start with Martrade, and then maybe later on, Surin and Jenica. The question is, with the supply chain and global rules changing, could we have an ASEAN standard, and where are we on this? Perhaps we start with you, Encik Abu Bakar. If you don't mind, I stand so that I can get some energy. So go ahead.
We are not a policy maker, so I'm not in the position. But I think in terms of standardization, anything that we do, we need to have a standard, right? Common standard, especially when we talk about collective ASEAN markets more than nearly now 700 million population. So it's huge. But the thing is that I think while we have other standards that addressing trade and business related matters, but on ESG, I think that we can further solidify and intensify our efforts to have a common standard among the ASEAN countries.
So you would agree, and perhaps this Asia ESG Positive Impact Consortium can take this up to lobby the different countries. But anyway, Janica, your point, your view.
I just find it a bit funny because we're talking about standardizing ESG framework, but when it comes to biodiversity, there isn't even a standard methodology on how to measure the stocks. No, I mean, compared to climate and carbon, biodiversity is actually lagging behind. So when it comes to your greenhouse gas emissions, and you're trying to look at impacts of of your emissions, you have scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. But we don't have that same for biodiversity. So you can measure your carbon footprint, but measuring biodiversity footprint is still in its very, very early stages. So there are also opportunities there, and maybe in the next future we could be able to come up with a unified standardized framework in order to measure that.
And this biodiversity lack of standard is not just ASEAN, it's across the whole globe, is it? Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Surin, your point of view.
Okay, I think standards is a loaded word lah, because when you talk about standards, normally you will also mention about certification, because certification is a way to check whether your standards are being, implemented. And there's already a lot of, standards out there. So usually we talk about global standards, and each country may have its own national standards. So speaking from a producer's point of view, a manufacturer or plantation company's point of view, more standards means more headache, because it means then you have to have auditing for various standards. And yeah, I mean, these companies can end up spending a lot of time and resources just doing audits. So is that the way to go? So I would think that rather than trying to come up with too many standards, we should focus on the improvement bit, right? Improving practices. And also going by what Cik Abu Bakar mentioned just now, right? It's actually the SMEs that are struggling. I don't worry about the Sime Darbis or the IOIs or the KLKs, in this region. They've got the resources, they've got the people who can help them achieve those objectives. But the SMEs, the smallholders, the small players, they're going to really struggle if there are a lot of things that they have to comply with. And I think the big players need to support the small players, support through the supply chain, make sure that they can improve their practices in a stepwise manner, help them along the way, yeah.
Very good. So your point is not standards, but helping to improve performance and get the larger organizations to help the SMEs. Thank you so much. If you don't mind, Sime Darby Property, a bit of promotion for you, your role as a biodiversity partner for this. So, yeah, thank you. Let's welcome. Yep. Can we get a mic? Yes. Perhaps an introduction.
Yasmin Rashid.
Yasmin, yes. Thank you, Yasmin. Let's give her a round of applause to encourage her. Yeah, thank you so much.
I think over the last 10, 15 years, I think we're just blessed. We're just blessed with a lot of land as well. And majority of our land are predominantly all unused oil palm plantation. So apart from focusing on converting them into townships, we're going to bring people to come live there as communities, and hopefully they can also have generations to live there as well. And I think we were guided by very strong leadership in the belief that turning agricultural soil into healthy soil symbolizes the beginning of making a healthy township. I think that was essentially the spirit and the philosophy. So we've been doing a lot of that. Of course, we remove palm oil trees, lah, right? But for every palm oil tree we remove, we replace it with what we call ERT species. I think Surin will be familiar, which are endangered, rare, or threatened tree species. So we've been doing this tracking for the last 10 years. We hope we can digitize this whole experience to give us an idea and map out whether our efforts are bringing back urban biodiversity into townships. So maybe a bit of shameless advertising here. KL East Park is one example where 50% of the township is green because of the 53-acre park. And we use it as a playground to educate communities. So we do things like put a thermometer outside, which is normally 35, 32 degrees. And as you track inside, you put another thermometer inside to and it's normally 21, 19 degrees, to kind of just give that knowledge to people who hike that without this green lung here, and it connects to Bukit Tabor, the entire township will also be a bit less pleasant. So we hope we can replicate this across township. I know it can be slightly academic, but I think we need to get to that level as well. And we hope, like working with perhaps, and we're working with nonprofits as well. I mean, at the end of the day, we hope what we do can generate data that can help us improve our townships, but more importantly, the data should sit with other people as well so that they can look at how they can improve their townships.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Wow, very inspiring. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause. So to me, that's important, right? Today, I mean, it's Friday evening, staying back for another hour for this. Why? But things like this, right? Inspiring us to do something different for the nature. So thank you so much. I see you're prepared to end us. Time's up. Thank you so much. Please join me to thank our panelists for participating today. Thank you so much.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chow, Encik Abu Bakar, Mr. Surin, Ms. Janika, as well as questions from the floor. Thank you, Yasmin. It's good to see you again. With that, ladies and gentlemen, nothing else, right? I think we'll just have to talk about this again more and more. It's quite endless, this topic. So once again, thank you so much, dear panelists. And we do hope that it was very insightful, informative for all of you attending here who are still here with us this afternoon. So I guess, Alvin, it is safe to say that ESG will surely expand significantly throughout our region, inshallah, and it is vital that the main key players of each country play a very significant role in sustaining ESG best practices in each country's representative industries, civil society, and more.